I could hear it in my mother's voice before she even finished her sentence. Caitlin, your grandmother has died. Could you come home? I was taken totally by surprise. I told her I would have to check with my boss first, but I'd call her right back. So I got up from my desk, walked over to my boss's office, and, mustering my most upbeat voice possible, said, "Hey there, I hope you don't mind if I take a few days off of work. I just found out that..." And as soon as I said the words, "My grandmother has died," I burst into tears. I hadn't really processed what had happened until I said the words out loud, and then all my colleagues are there, rushing to try to console me, but they're asking me all these questions. "Oh my gosh, Caitlin, how did she die? Were you too close? When was the last time you saw her?" I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to your colleagues that you haven't seen your grandmother in 20 years? My family is from a small Pennsylvania coal town. And like a lot of other families in that part of the country, they were deeply conservative and deeply religious. But not my mother and my Aunt Carol. They were different. They were liberal and progressive. They were vegetarians before it was cool. I grew up eating a lot of texturized vegetable protein. It was delicious. And they were more spiritual than religious. We didn't go to church, and I may have not realized that Christmas wasn't to celebrate the birth of Santa Claus until I was 7. And our more untraditional lifestyle had always been a point of contention for my grandparents. One day, when I was 8 years old, my mother and my Aunt Carol sat down my cousins and I because they had something important to tell us. "Kids," they said, "we're no longer welcome in your grandparents' home. We're being disowned." And I remember being really puzzled by this. Why would people who loved us not want to see us anymore? And wait, did this include Christmas and my birthday? Just like that, my life changed. My mother was one of 10 children, so holiday gatherings are filled with literally dozens of aunts and uncles and cousins, and now there were just 6 of us. That first holiday after being disowned, it was almost all I could think about. I kept wondering if they were having fun and did they miss us? But the 6 of us banded together. We forged new traditions and new memories. New family members joined the ranks of our little outcast tribe in the form of step-family or close friends. But I never shook the feeling that I had lost something fundamental, most of all because I never stopped missing my grandmother. I really loved her. In my memory, she's this big, squishy woman. And when she hugs you, your face kind of sinks into her like she's made out of memory foam. And she sings me songs and she reads me stories. And this one day, she sits me on her lap and she says, "Caitlin, you are my favorite grandchild." I never, for 1 minute, even entertained the possibility that I was never going to see her again. I had just always assumed that if she was dying, someone would get in touch so that we could have a chance to say goodbye. But then we found out that she'd been sick for a whole year and dead for nearly a week before we found out. And it's not like no one knew how to reach us. Let's face it, in the digital age, even my grandmother had a Facebook account. And a few years earlier, I had begrudgingly accepted a friend request from a cousin. So I decided to reach out because I had always assumed that when my grandmother died, I would go to the funeral. So I sent him a message. "Dear Justin, I'm just finding out that our grandmother has passed away. What are the arrangements?" It was a big mistake. Within an hour of reaching out, the word was out that we knew, and an aunt contacted my mother after 20 years to uninvite us to the funeral. And I was devastated. It felt like I'd lost my grandmother once, and now I was losing any opportunity for closure. And not only that, I felt really guilty for putting my mother in this horrible situation. But I flew back to Pittsburgh anyways to help my mother plan a memorial of her own. But I'm a contrarian by nature. I haven't met a rule I didn't think needed a little bit of breaking, and being told I couldn't go to my grandmother's funeral, it just made me want to go more. So, on the eve of the funeral, with time running out, I broached the subject. "So, Mom, let's say if I wanted to go to the funeral, could I borrow your car?" My mother's eyes grew wide. "Caitlin, you can't go to the funeral by yourself. You don't know how they'll react. These people are strangers to you. I would feel obliged to go with you." Our eyes met, and I think we both realized This was important to us. So we called the funeral home, spoke to the funeral director, kind of explained the situation, and we weren't so weird after all. We request to go to funerals early to avoid other family members, happens all the time. The funeral director would let us in at 6 a.m., no one else would be there until 9 a.m., and just like that, Operation Grandma Funeral Infiltration was born. We loaded in the car the next day at 5 a.m. to make the hour-long trip to Denbo, Pennsylvania. And on the way, I was super excited. I was getting to do something that was important to me, and no one could stop me. But once I got there, I was racked with anxiety. Denbo is literally a one-horse town. What if someone drives by and recognizes us? So I wrapped my scarf around my head so you could only see my eyes. I probably looked like I was there to rob the place. And as we knocked on the door, I was sure that it would open, and on the other side would be my family laying in wait to catch us in the act. But this little old lady let us in, and before I knew it, there I was standing in front of my grandmother's casket. And to the left of the casket was this poster. It said Grandma across the top, and it was covered in photos of cousins, most of whom I didn't even know existed. But there was no photo of me there. And suddenly, I had snuck into a stranger's funeral. But it was the moment of closure I needed. My mother has this phrase, it's not the family you're born with that matters, it's the family you choose. And that day, standing in the funeral home with my mother and my Aunt Carol, I knew this is the family I choose. Thank you.